The Nikon D3500 is a brand new budget/entry-level DSLR from one of the giants in the camera world. It stands squarely off against the mirrorless wave, and can it work for you as a budget video camera for online content creation? Let's find out. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I've been on a kick lately to bring you as many budget camera options as possible because I think these frugal finds are not only the best way to start making videos, but they're also a great way to increase your production value if you're looking to move away from something like a cell phone or an action camera. We've covered a whole range of budget cameras so far, but today I'm excited to check out the brand new Nikon D3500. And before we get too far into the video, I do want to thank my friends over at B&H Photo for sending me this camera. If you'd like to get one of your very own, you can check out the links in the description below of this video. They're down there somewhere. Hey, links. Whew. Okay, now it's time to find out what this surprisingly small camera can actually do. And disclaimer, for those of you with itchy keyboard trigger fingers waiting to pounce because I'm not about to talk about the photography spec, you won. I'm not a photographer, nor am I a professional videographer. I make home videos and I make these YouTube videos. So those are the specs that we're gonna cover today. Online content creation. The D3500 is a very tiny DSLR from longtime camera manufacturer Nikon. It has a 24.2 megapixel DX, that's what Nikon calls APS-C, size CMOS sensor. It comes equipped with the XP4 image processor, it has no optical low pass filter, and a 3-inch monitor on the back. Not a touchscreen, we'll talk about that later. It can record full HD 1080p video up to 60 frames per second and has a multicam 11-point autofocus system. The kit lens is the Nikon standard DX18-55 VR, which is vibration reduction, their optical stabilization, style lens. Physically, this is a really small DSLR, and as somebody that predominantly uses mirrorless cameras, that says something. Now, you can tell they saved a bit on the manufacturing cost when it comes to the body because, can you hear that? It does feel on the cheaper side. The body feels very plasticky, and it doesn't really feel as robust as I'd like. One thing about a competitor of this camera, the Canon SL2, was even though it was also a budget body, they coated it in this really nice like rubber grip that made it feel better than it actually was. This does have a rubber grip right here on the hand, and it's actually quite comfortable to hold, but it does feel cheaper. Something that I do really like though, and this ends up missing on a lot of budget cameras, is it actually has a nice array of physical buttons and dials. I personally really hate having to go through menus to figure out how to change a setting, which is something that drives me crazy on my Sony a5100 that's back there. But the D3500 has a pretty good layout that will allow you to make easy changes as the needs arise, and everything just feels good. Nothing about the button layout feels cheap. But here's one of the biggest negatives about the whole darn camera, and those of you that make online content understand, the D3500 doesn't have a flip screen. That sucks so bad. One of the benefits DSLRs generally have over most of their mirrorless counterparts is the flip screen. Again, look at the Canon SL2 for comparison. I know that these are more for photographers, but the DSLR revolution has allowed many of us to make video content with these types of cameras. So flip screens are pretty important. Another negative about the screen is it's not a touch screen, which, I mean, I don't want to be too harsh about that, but its main competition all have some sort of touch-enabled screen. Even the Sony a5100 has a touch focus screen. Some of their competition even has flip screens. And the last physical thing I want to talk about is it does come with a 1230 milliamp hour battery, which is pretty darn good for a small camera like this. Okay, that's enough talking at the camera. Let's get into what I consider to be the most important aspects of a camera if you want to use it for online content creation. And we're still looking for a name for this category, so leave a comment below with your best idea, and the funniest one or the coolest one will be the one that we use going forward. First up, fiddliness. We might need to get like shirts or something that says like, we don't like fiddliness. But in all seriousness, fiddliness is the most important aspect of a camera if you're gonna use it to create online content, in my opinion. Image quality is great, and we'll get there in a minute, but if you can't quickly turn around content, or if your camera is too frustrating to use, or it's just too hard to get your settings dialed in, I just won't use it. I'll bring something that is easier to use because I got quick turnaround times. So how does the Nikon fare in the fiddly department? It's not the best I've ever used, but it's not the worst. It's really apparent even with a cursory glance that while Canon, Sony, and Panasonic, they cater towards videographers with their cameras, Nikon really doesn't, or they haven't thought to put it in there yet. There is no dedicated video mode, nor does the video function have its own dedicated menu. You have to dig into a sub menu to find like the 5 recording mode options that you get. And even then it's in Nikon speak of this system, which as a Sony Panasonic guy, I don't understand that language. I mean, now that could be a personal problem. So if you can read Nikon, you'll be in a way better place than I am. It also doesn't have an audio in jack. Now that's not a big deal when you look at other similarly priced options, but dang, that's another tough pill to swallow when you look at the camera as a whole. Now, no kidding, something that I figured out like as we were making this video is I've spent like 3 days playing around with this camera to do this initial impressions video. And I could not get the continuous autofocus in video to work like at all. I just couldn't get it to work. I was trying to video my son walking towards me and away from me. I tried videoing myself. I just could not get the continuous autofocus mode to work, which was strange because it has like face tracking and it has object tracking, which is actually pretty good, but for some reason I could not get it to work. And then when I sat down here, this is the second time we're going through the script, by the way. When I sat down here and I put the camera up on my tripod and I started using it, the autofocus started working, and it was, you'll see here when we get to image quality, the autofocus is actually pretty good on this thing. Whatever Nikon does, I think they do have those 11 points as phase detection autofocus points. It's pretty good. So that does help a lot in the fiddliness category. Also, like we previously mentioned, there is no flip screen. I get it, not all people want a fully articulating screen. You know, that also sounds crazy to me, to be honest. But if this is gonna be an entry-level camera for videographers who spend all of their time in front of the camera, a flip screen is really, really important. You can get a monitor that will allow for checks on focus and exposure and framing. I'm currently using one of my Sony A6500, but that's an extra expense and complexity that I don't like, especially if I'm recommending a budget action camera. So that's pretty rough when it comes to fiddliness. Next up, ecosystem. A camera's ecosystem is far more important than the body itself. A camera body can only take you so far. Don't get me wrong, they are great and I love them, but without lenses, accessories, and the like, you won't be able to get the best video quality out of it. And Nikon does have a very strong ecosystem surrounding their DX line of cameras. They have a huge variety of lenses for their smaller cameras. Not only that, but they have a wide selection of grips, batteries, flashes, all sorts of things that ensure that if you decide to invest in this system, there is more than just the individual body to work with. And finally, and for me, you know, the least important, image quality. Now that it's time for the image quality test, let's swap out the A6500 we are currently filming on and see what the image quality would be if you wanted to use this as a talking head YouTube style narrative camera. Okay. Going from APS-C to APS-C isn't as fun as Micro Four Thirds to APS-C, but look at all that DSLR goodness. Like we mentioned in the specification part of the video, the D3500 can record in up to 1080p, 60 frames per second. We are currently recording in 1080p 30 frames per second, upscaled to 4K. And I think it looks perfectly fine. It's not as shocking as the A5100 for low light, but it does well enough that if you ended up doing this kind of camera work, you wouldn't be terribly off. The real question is, are you willing to put up with the extra hassle of the camera to get this image quality? And for me, I probably wouldn't. Now, I could see where it might work for somebody, especially those that are already heavily invested in the Nikon line, but these extra steps wouldn't work for me, especially when there are other competition out there that do it better. Now, I normally give a lot of latitude to budget cameras because, again, I don't think technical image quality is the most important aspect of making online content, and expensive cameras are generally expensive because of image quality abilities and other advanced features. Another benefit of a more reasonably priced camera is that they are aimed at beginners, so they make it really easy to operate, and the D3500 is very easy to operate. The problem's gonna be the Nikon D3500 has a few too many major issues for me to ever really recommend it as somebody's primary video camera. 1, there's no flip screen, which by itself isn't a deal breaker. 2, there's no audio in jack. You're currently hearing the audio off of my boom microphone going into an audio recorder. And that by itself isn't a deal breaker. 3, the autofocus will work and it will find faces, but as you've probably seen here, it does an awful lot of hunting, and that can ruin your video. A little bit isn't a big deal. Even Sony and Canon cameras hunt from time to time, but when it happens a lot, that means you can't really trust the continuous autofocus, and that's a really serious third hurdle to cover for this camera. Now, like I said, not a single one of these issues is a deal breaker. In fact, I work around these single issues all the time. That's why I have a recording setup, because I use cameras a lot that don't have the three things I really want. However, when all three are together as problems, that is a really, really tough pill to swallow, especially when there are other options out there for the same price and cheaper that are far easier to use with the same image quality. But that's not to say there are not some things that I really like about the D3500, because there are some things that I really like about this. The small size is awesome. The manual buttons are great, and for the price are probably the best feature of the camera. There's not very many cameras out there at this price that have that good a feature set. And I think the image quality for the price is pretty darn good. But I don't know that I could recommend this to somebody that is looking for an online content camera. There are just too many hurdles that you have to jump through to turn around decent image quality, and we are on online content creators, we're on quick turnaround, so we can't really have those hurdles if we want to be able to use a camera long term. Thanks for watching.